Hello, my name's Reverend Dr. Elise Cannon. Today is Ash Wednesday, February 14th. This is a day in the Christian calendar where around the world Christians, you might see the sign of the cross and ashes on the forehead. It's the idea of from dust we came and from dust we will return. It begins the season of Lent, leading up to Easter, but a season of repentance and reflection and lament. And how appropriate it is for us to be entering into that season at this moment when things continue to be so incredibly desperate. I have several updates. You might have heard my update from yesterday in front of the Capitol building. Monday and Tuesday of this week, we had many of our leaders from Churches for Middle East Peace, board members, some heads of denominations came in from out of town, for which we're so grateful. We had meetings about, meetings about Churches for Middle East Peace's work, and then we had meetings with the Biden administration. And you might have heard a little bit of that update yesterday. So I'll start with some updates from here in Washington, D.C. The White House was originally saying we don't support a full-on incursion into Rafah. And this week they have shifted gears. And now they're saying we never said that Israel can't go into Rafah to remove Hamas. Hamas remains a viable threat to the Israeli people. Israelis and the IDF absolutely are going to continue operations against their leadership and their infrastructure as they should. That was from Kirby, the White House spokesperson. And, at first, we heard this firsthand from the meetings we had with the administration yesterday, and it was frustrating to hear them say, we don't support a ground incursion into Rafah unless there's a plan. Now they're talking about a plan to move people, but the whole idea of you can't kill multiple of civilians unless you have a plan to do so just seems so ridiculous and will only further support ethnic cleansing and maybe even genocide. So let me be clear, not all people who work for the Biden administration support U.S. policies. Increasingly, we're hearing that many, if not the majority of people within the Biden administration do not support the current policies that are being articulated. And so many people are working from within. They're seeking alternative means. They're filing dissent cables at the State Department. They're staying up late. They're losing sleep at night, as they should be. And I just want to say I'm grateful for those who are working within the context of whatever power they have to call for a ceasefire, saying we can't be complicit, that we have to use the power and influence ahead of us to seek to turn the tide of this war, to end the death of innocent civilians. And so anyone who is working to that end for a comprehensive ceasefire and for peace, we really should support them. We're calling that an inside-outside strategy. And so there are continued conversations about hostage exchange and a ceasefire. There have been talks in Cairo the past few days, which will be extended for another 3 days, according to an Egyptian source. The talks, they're only involving low-level officials, but they're discussing a new framework for a potential deal. You'll recall that before there was this Paris conversation, then the plan was given to Hamas. Hamas, adjusted and had a counter proposal, and Netanyahu rejected that counter proposal. The Israeli government did not send representatives to these Cairo meetings. Netanyahu ordered the Israeli delegation, who's headed by the Mossad chief, not to return to Cairo for continued talks. And he said that the only way Israelis can re-engage is if Hamas changes their stance. And that's the only way negotiations would progress. Hamas's stance has been that they would only release hostages if there is a commitment ultimately to a permanent ceasefire and the end of the war. It could be multi-tiered, but that has been one of the conditions Hamas has been consistent about. The Hostage and Missing Family Forums in Israel has protested or said that they will protest in front of the headquarters of the Defense Ministry in Israel in Tel Aviv on Thursday against the decision to sacrifice the lives of the hostages. That's a direct quote. And Palestinian President Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas called on Hamas to secure a hostage deal with Israel to spare the Palestinian people further catastrophe, according to Palestinian news sources. The U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby did not answer whether or not U.S. President Joe Biden believes Prime Minister Netanyahu is an honest broker, focusing instead on their decades-long relationship and their ability to speak candidly with one another. And a delegation of family members of hostages being held in Gaza has said that they will go to The Hague and they will file a complaint at the International Criminal Court against Hamas, because they have said it is time that justice is done. It's important to note that it's been about 20 days since the International Court of Justice, the UN body, ruled that the Israeli government's actions in Gaza could constitute a genocide, and the ICJ had ordered Israel that they need to submit a report sometime this month on how it's complying with the court's orders and also keeping evidence of any acts of genocide. Which, Lord have mercy, the death toll in Gaza now is 28,576 deaths, and the injuries are at 68,291 since October 7th. It's still believed that there are roughly 100 hostages who are alive and still held in Gaza, and that the Israeli death toll is at about 1,400 people with 5,400 injuries. All of that since October 7th. Escalations on the border between Israel and Lebanon have continued. One Israeli soldier was killed, 8 were wounded, and Israel launched an extensive wave of airstrikes in southern Lebanon, which resulted in a Lebanese woman and 2 children being killed in strikes on a village in South Lebanon, and an additional 7 people were wounded. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Ministry of Health said that 13 Palestinians were wounded when the Israeli Defense Forces fired near Hebron. It was later reported that one of those people who had been wounded died of their injuries. And that brings up the question also, Israel has really protested the US's actions and those of Britain and France, which have imposed sanctions on settlers involving violence against Palestinians. And so Paris had made the decision to impose sanction on settlers as well. They did not wait for the EU to discuss this. And so Israel has said that they fear that other EU countries are going to follow suit. The past couple of days, King Abdullah of Jordan has been here in Washington, D.C., and he's still here now, but the most significant thing is he had a meeting with President Biden, and they did a press conference together. And President Biden said this. He said, specifically talking about what's happening in Gaza, he said, the major military operation in Rafah should not proceed without a credible plan to ensure the safety and support of the more than 1 million people sheltering there. Many people there have been displaced multiple times, fleeing the violence to the north. To the north, and now they're packed into Rafah, exposed and vulnerable, and they need to be protected. Those were the words of President Biden. And it's not insignificant that King Abdullah said this at this press conference. He was much, much more direct, and our positions are very much in alignment with those of Jordan. King Abdullah said, we cannot afford an Israeli attack on Rafah. It is certain to create another humanitarian catastrophe. Referring to the war more broadly, he said, we cannot stand by and let this continue. We need a lasting ceasefire now, and this war must end. So Churches for Middle East Peace, affirms that position that King Abdullah articulated. We call on the U.S. government. We cannot stand by and let this continue. We must have a lasting ceasefire now, and this war must be brought to an end.